Hello, hello. Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this very last screening event of the March One Earth Film Fest 11th annual run. Please type in the chat. Some of you have already done so if you're just joining us. Our custom is to type in the chat where we're joining from today, how many people are watching with us, and if we're able, the native land which we occupy. If you do not know the answer to the last piece, you can go to native-land.ca. So already we have Liz from Westchester here. Welcome, Liz. Elizabeth from Naperville, the Council of the Three Fires. Amy Roberts in Providence, Rhode Island, land of the Wampanoag people. Lou is here. Welcome, Lou. Timothy in Orlando, Seminole Territory. Philip, welcome. Cindy in Park Ridge, Potawatomi Nation. Cassandra, hi, thanks for being here. Lisa on Chicago's South Side. Kickapoo Territory. Debbie in Bourbonnais. We have Burrell, Julie from Chicago, Potawatomi. Debbie is here, Megan from Chicago, and Philip and Eva from Raleigh, North Carolina. Keep on checking in, everybody. I'm just going to move us forward. So I'm Anna Garcia Doyle. I'm the executive director of One Earth Collective, which produces the One Earth Film Festival. I'd like to welcome you to this festival screening event. We do hope it will provide us all with rich opportunities for learning, a brave and safe space for important conversations, and a way to move from inspiration to action. We absolutely could not do this work without the support of our sponsors and partners. So thank you to WBEZ Chicago and Vocalo, Edward Jones, the Field Museum, and Environmentalists of Color. Another quick note, if your circumstances allow, please donate to support One Earth's nonprofit year-round screening events, youth programs, and more at oneearthfilmfest.org. We gratefully welcome you to One Earth's 11th festival season, and we invite you to join us in turning the tide on our climate crisis. The festival uses the power of film to create a sea change on topics of environment and those intersected with environment, like racial, social, and economic justice. This year, we've adapted a hybrid format where all screenings are virtual, with some accompanying in-person events taking place in the Chicago area. Whether live or virtual, we remain committed to our unique model of gathering in community to raise awareness of the issues, engage in dialogue, and be inspired to act. A powerful image and call to collective action in light of this year's festival theme, Turn the Tide, are the words of Japanese writer Ryanosuke Satoru. Individually, we are one drop. Together, we are an ocean. Our event will take place in 4 parts. Soon, we'll introduce you to some folks who will help us have a rich discussion after the film. Then, we'll watch the film together. After the film, we'll unpack its themes in a facilitated dialogue with our panelists. Please use the chat to share your thoughts, ideas, or questions. We'll end by sharing concrete actions you can take to be part of the solution. These suggested actions come from our panelists and action partners. I'd now like to make a few brief acknowledgements. The first is that as we reframe narratives around justice, environment, and equitable solutions to our climate crisis, we acknowledge the many filmmakers, film subjects, facilitators, and panelists joining this and other fest events. Thank you. Your wisdom and experiences help us spark and sustain actions for the protection of our One Earth and for the just treatment of its resources and its people. The second acknowledgement is that One Earth Collective is based in Chicago, the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, and home to many other tribes, including today, peoples from over 100 tribal nations. Despite this, there are currently no federally recognized tribes in Illinois, due in part to colonization, relocation, and genocide. One Earth sustains its commitment to presenting films that center Indigenous stories and voices. We believe that beyond acknowledging the native lands we each occupy, we must lift up Indigenous voices and support the work of First Nations groups. If you're in the Chicago area, please support the important work being done by the American Indian Center Chicago, the Chicago American Indian Community Collaborative, Chi Nations Youth Council, and others. And watch for the Field Museum exhibition, Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories, co-curated with collaborators from more than 100 tribes, opening this May. A third acknowledgement is that shared agreements can help keep our conversations safe and respectful. Please observe the following agreements when participating. Put aside your preconceptions, acknowledge your privilege, internalize what you've learned, approach the conversation with respect, engage your active listening, use I statements, and get comfortable with your own story. One last thing before you meet our facilitator and program participants. If you're active on social media, tell people that this is happening. Amplify these voices and be a part of the community we're building here together. The hashtags for the festival are hashtag OEFF 2022 and hashtag Turn the Tide. And now I'd like to turn it over to our facilitator to introduce themselves, the panelists, and our film.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I look forward to watching this film together. And we'll get introduced to our panelists. My name is Burrell. I'm the director of the Chicago Peace Fellows with the Goldin Institute. And I am a lifelong Chicagoan that's been dedicated to ensuring that all communities are included in conversations like this about our planet and our environment. So the first person, and forgive me, I have multiple screens going on here. Our first panelist I'd like to introduce is Jo-Elle de la Sancha, who's an associate professor at Chicago State University and research associate for the Field Museum. Would you like to introduce yourself, Jo-Elle?
Sí, muy buenas noches, damas y caballeros. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jo-Elle de la Sancha. I am a researcher. I'm a mammologist by training. I primarily work with mammals. I am a new immigrant to this country. I was born in Toluca, Mexico, and I was raised in southern New Mexico. So I am a new member of the Chicago area. So thank you very much.
All right, welcome to Chicago. Bienvenidos. And I'd like to introduce Jo-Elle Mogerman, director of the St. Louis Zoo and WildCare Park. Welcome, Jo-Elle.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Jo-Elle Mogerman. I am a born and raised Southsider of Chicago and just recently moved to St. Louis about 3 years ago. Academically, I'm a scientist, conservation biologist who has spent my career working in zoos, aquariums, and nature centers, mostly in Chicago, but as you can see, also here in St. Louis. So excited about the film and the conversation to come.
All right, thank you. So this discussion will come after we watch the film. So please stay tuned with us. Once we get to the end of the film, we'll have a wonderful discussion with our panelists. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back. That was a lot, but we will come together and have a discussion about that. Starting with the question, what are some of the scenes in the film that stood out to you? Please enter these into the chat. Any of your takeaways? You know, what are you thinking right now? What are some of your instant reactions to having seen that film? So please put that in the chat. And we are monitoring the chat so that we can elevate some of that to the discussion. So thank you everyone for everything that you're adding to the chat. There's a lot of conversation around biodiversity. Right, a lot of conversation about waste, industry, rhinos, the impact of poaching. We have Samantha who talked about the wet markets with live animals and how heartbreaking that is. Thank you. Laura's worried that there's not enough political, corporate, and individual and global will. A line that stood out to Jay is escalator to oblivion. And thank you, Ishi, for bringing up protection for the pangolin, which we got to see one of the wonderful shorts from the students prior to the film. Julie's worried about the pandemics, more pandemics coming. I think that should be a worry for us all. So feel free to continue to add to the chat as we're having our conversations. I think it's important for us not just to hear from me and our esteemed panelists, but also for us to hear from each other. Like, this is a conversation. Right, Lisa Willis, if we all do 5 meaningful things to change our negative impacts on Earth, I believe that would make a difference. Everyone has 5 things that they can do without diminishing their lifestyle. Thank you for that. There's a really important conversation that we'll have about action towards the end of our panel discussion. So stay tuned, Lisa. So now we'll move on to our panel. As we said prior to the film, we're joined by Noé de la Sancha, Associate Professor, Chicago State University and Research Associate with the Field Museum, and Jo-Elle Mogerman, Director of the St. Louis Zoo and WildCare Park. So welcome, Jo-Elle and Noé. Really interested in this discussion. I'd like to start it out with what's something that's standing out to you right now about the film, or parts that really strike your heart. I'll start with you, Jo-Elle.
There are a couple of things, and I'd say probably the first one is this notion of value that is a thread throughout the film, and it's about the conversation around our economies and how our economies are built for growth. and economic growth. And part of what we have to do in order to sort of disrupt the systems that are deep and in play is around reassigning value. So is it the value of the dollar? Is it the value of the income? Or are there other values for which we can place a higher value on certain things that we may not typically do now? And part of how we got to this place that we're in this sixth mass extinction is not valuing biodiversity in the ways that we should. And we have to also recognize that we don't fully understand all of the networks and all of the different ways that the earth has connected these systems and these animals together. And so the solutions are, it's not a single solution. We need multiple solutions from multiple different places. The animals that you see in the video and then in the film, there aren't animal problems. We have people problems. And that puts us in a really wonderful place to solve some of these problems because they're people problems. They're not animal problems, even though I, as a scientist, study the animals and have studied the animals. They're really sort of people problems. So we have this really rich and deep toolbox that we can look at to begin to solve problems.
Jo-Elle. Noah?
Wow, that was brilliant. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna go home now. No, just kidding. No, this is awesome. This is great stuff. I think hopefully, so I think right now, especially for many of us, there's this, for many of us that have seen documentaries like these, where you get to see really awesome images of really exotic places with really amazing animals and species, there's a tendency for us to think that we already know everything about nature. We already know everything about all the animals out there. We already have discovered everything. That's it. It's all, we all know it, right? And I would say that it's actually the exact opposite. The vast majority of animals and plant species on the planet, we still haven't even begun to understand them. For the vast majority of the places of our planet, we still don't know enough about them, most places. And it's actually the few animals that we know a lot about, many of them who tend to be charismatic. I'm a mammologist, so I tend to study mammals. And one of the things to keep in mind, for example, is that approximately 40% of all mammal species are rodents. There's some kind of rodent. And then 30% of mammals are going to be bats. So between rats and bats, that is 70% of all mammal species. The vast majority of those species, we don't know anything about them. We don't know what they live, where they live, what they do, what they eat. We don't even have a correct name, a scientific name for them. And new species are being described all the time, especially in tropical regions on our planet. And so when we start thinking that we don't even know what species we have, much less the actual networks that these are part of, and the importance of all their other connections and these other networks and how they not only affect ecosystems and ultimately people, even if we're looking at it from a selfish perspective, we should think about how they affect us down the road, you know, because ultimately it is going to start to impact all our ecological communities, our various processes that allow for life to flourish and to even stay. Yeah, so that's one of the things that I would highlight on top of that.
Thank you, Noah. You know, I wonder if there's a term that gets thrown around a lot, the Anthropocene. If you could talk a little bit more about what that is.
Would you like to start, or should I?
Yep.
Go ahead, Noah.
Go for it, Noah, and then we'll go over to you, Jo-Elle.
Awesome. Okay, so big picture, our planet, as far as we know, is approximately 4.5 billion years old. In that time, there's been 5 mass extinctions where anywhere between 70 to 90% of the living things basically went extinct. The fifth mass extinction was the last one where a huge meteorite hit what is now the Yucatan Peninsula and wiped out all large dinosaurs. We are currently in the sixth mass extinction, which is the Anthropocene. Now, there's plenty of evidence that this has been happening for quite some time. As soon as Homo sapien left the continent of Africa, every time we entered a new continent, there's been mass extinctions, especially of megafauna. This happened in Asia, in Europe, in Australia, and the Americas. So this has been happening for a long time. We have actually just sped it up quite a bit in the last maybe 200-300 years. And we're actually not only just affecting big things like saber-toothed tigers and mastodons, but we're actually starting to affect little things, especially things like insects and small mammals and small birds and amphibians. This is where we're at now.
Jo-Elle?
Yeah, I would just build on that and say that there's the 80-20 rule that's out there, right? And so there's 20% of the human population consuming 80% of the world goods. And I mean, that's a very, broad kind of brush kind of statement. But that sort of 80-20 rule really gets at the scale and the impact that we're having on the planet and who's having a significant impact. So sometimes you see these sorts of films and you think, oh, it's them over there because in that country they're doing these things. And oftentimes those are countries and places of Black and brown people. But really, and I think the film did touch on this, which is great, is it's us in the Western world in many ways consuming an incredible amount of the Earth's resources. And we have an opportunity to really have a really great conversation about what resources are and what value they hold and value for whom across the planet. And I think when we begin to redefine those things, we begin to disrupt systems and we begin to sort of see how things that we can do, some of the little things that were in the chat can have actually a really big impact. Because again, here in the US, we're part of the 20% consuming 80% of the resources.
Thank you. Several people have in the chat have brought up palm oil. Do either of you or both of you have any reflections on palm oil specifically?
Yeah, I'll start off if that's okay, Noe. Palm oil has a really big impact for orangutans. So my career has been spent in zoos and aquariums, and we have orangutans in human care. And when it came to habitat loss, which is a big, huge issue now that was talked about in the film, when you have large, very charismatic animals like orangutans that need forests and they need large areas, it was really easy for zoos and aquariums to use the microphone that they have with the millions and millions of guests who come through our doors, who are connecting with these orangutans every day in human care and saying, what's impacting them? It's habitat loss. More specifically, it's palm oil plantations. And you know what, people? You know what you're eating that has palm oil in it? A lot of stuff. But you know what really pulls at your heartstrings a lot? Is chocolate candy. And so as some of the conversations and the awareness building around where palm oil is found, and think about what is our biggest holiday next to Christmas in this country? Halloween, where you consume a lot. That whole holiday is built around candy full of palm oil. So now we have individuals could opt to not use candy with palm oil in it. But let's use our collective voice, and this is what we did, to start talking with the significant candy makers and talk about the issues around habitat loss with the use of palm oil, with animals that people identify with and love, like orangutans, to get them to change their sourcing. And that is exactly what happened. They started to change their sourcing. Now they're still using palm oil, but that's how we can we all have a microphone, we all have a voice, how we can leverage those voices to really kind of begin to implement change. Because we are all consumers. We can take advantage of that privilege that we have as that 20% and force change with some of the companies that we know that they can actually do better.
Thank you, Jo-Elle. So you all heard it here first. No more Halloween, no more chocolate candy. So.
That's exactly not it. But we could change how that candy's made.
Exactly. Noé, did you have something specifically about palm oil?
Yeah, the only one thing, this is brilliant, by the way, by Jo-Elle. She's amazing. So what I would add is if you just do a quick Google search, there's several websites where you could just look up what products have palm oil in them. And you can see it's everything. It's all over the place. It's in shampoos, in all kinds of processed foods, in virtually every product that you consume. So especially here in the United States, we consume this daily, even if we're not out using palm oil directly. I think the biggest part is to become educated about the things that are that we use on a regular basis: soaps, shampoos, creams, lipstick. Most of it has palm oil, and while I agree that chocolate is also one of those things that does have it, there's the ability that we have in the United States is to be is to sort of consume with our dollars, right? And we could do that a lot if you're educated and you just and that's the thing. A lot of people get overwhelmed and say, well, we have to change everything about everything that we do. Then that's it. It's over. I'm going to the mountains. No, it's not. That's not the answer, right? The thing is, we're going to need lots and lots of answers, and just being mindful and understand what products have these things like palm oil, for example, and you just make better decisions, you know. And I think what Jo-Elle was trying to say is not get rid of Halloween, but buy better candy, right? They probably taste better anyways. So yeah.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think it's really important, particularly as Americans in the US. Someone in the chat referred to us as the spoiled children of the world, and being more ethical consumers. But, you know, I'd like to, one of the things is knowledge is power, right? So they talk a lot about biodiversity and this whole idea in this concept. So, you know, palm oil is a tree. So if we have a bunch of palm oil trees, you know, why is that not good? You know, what's the importance of biodiversity to us and our planet?
So what I think is interesting about that is we have to understand, for me in my work, it's all been about bringing diverse voices to the table, right? And always understanding the cultural context in which things exist. And so your observation about, well, palm oil is a tree, right? Trees are good, right? What's the problem? It's trees. They're planting trees. Well, part of it is the value that we have placed on a certain type of agriculture, which across the globe is not sustainable. And that's monocultures, where you have a single plant being grown. And when you look back at other countries, they didn't farm in this monoculture kind of method. That's not a traditional farming method. You would mix different crops in. You would end up with agricultural spaces that were actually quite diverse because of the plant diversity in them that would bring in animal diversity. And so a lot of what we have now is this sort of notion of what an agricultural field is or what it looks like, what good vegetables look like, right? And that the ugly ones are somehow non-edible. Like where did all that come from? And so we need to, again, sort of begin to rethink and look at and really deeply examine the values of what we have about things that how they look and if they're good or bad, and the values and judgments we place on them. I saw in the chat there was a fair amount of conversation around, planting, doing gardens for native wildlife. And if you do a garden for native wildlife, it looks very different than a manicured lawn, right? And we place more value on manicured lawns. We place more value for picking up the leaves right when they fall, rather than leaving them on the ground year round to have hiding places for insects, so that during migration, the birds have places. It's little things like that we are driven. Some of our behavior is driven on these values. And I think Noe said it correctly. It's around being aware of what you're doing, but also standing up and sharing it with others. That, yeah, my leaves are on the ground, not because I'm being a jerk because I want our neighborhood to look bad. It's because these sorts of things, it has these sorts of connections. I'm planting native plants in my yard. So no, my yard isn't going to look green and manicured. And actually, this is beautiful as well. So for me, it's if we're really going to make the kind of accelerated change that we need to make in order to begin to start tipping the scales back in another way, we're not only going to have to take action, but part of that action is around reassessing what we value and how we make judgments on what is good and what is beautiful.
Thank you for that, Jo-Elle. I'm hearing a little bit of a subtext of social equity and justice, because there's a reason why a certain type of lawn and certain types of practices, as a matter of fact, there are laws that prevent people from having, lawns that are actually more natural. Noe, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the social justice angle of biodiversity loss. Like, what are some of the things that are getting in the way, and what are some of the things socially that we need to be aware of that's contributing to this loss in biodiversity?
Yeah, it's complex, right? There's so much. Okay, so first of all, when we start thinking about it, right, the highest amount of biodiversity on our planet right now is right smack in the middle of our planet, in this wide band that goes between 23 degrees north, 23 degrees south of the equator, right? That's where you have the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. That is where most of biological biodiversity is right now. That disproportionately is in countries that currently tend to be low-income countries, to put it one way. I don't know how else to put it, right? And it tends to disproportionately affect people of color, right? Just that's how it is. And so, first of all, many of these countries that are the ones that are getting most intensely impacted by these problems are the ones that benefit economically the least, right? And this is the same thing with climate change in many ways. Many of the deforestation that is the consequence. So one good example, I work in the Atlantic forest of South America, which is the second most biodiverse forest system after the Amazon. And a lot of the deforestation that happens with that is for the production of soy. Well, now that production of soy is not to feed people in places like Brazil, Paraguay, or Argentina, is for feedlots that then get sent out to other rich countries elsewhere, right? And so there's the vast majority of the negative impacts of deforestation. This also happens in Southeast Asia with things like palm oil. And in places like West Africa, like in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, where they're losing most of their rainforest for production of cacao, for example. Actually, 70% of all the cacao on the planet right now is from West Africa, from these two relatively small countries. Cote d'Ivoire is about the size of Montana, so you can get an idea. And they produce 40% of all the cacao on the planet, right? And so when you think about this, many countries who have less economic pool are disproportionately affected by this biodiversity crisis. And the other thing I would say, it even happens here in the United States, right? Where do we see all the landfills? Where do we see the biggest amount of pollution? not just in the United States, but even in Chicago, right? It happens in low-income communities that a lot of those tend to be Latino or African American, and it disproportionately affects low-income folks, you know. So it's everywhere, I guess, even here, even in the quote-unquote developed rich countries.
Thank you for that, Noe, and thank you for bringing it local. And I'd like to switch over to a conversation about action. Like, what are some of the things that we can start doing right here in Chicago or in the local communities that are represented by people who are watching this? What are some of the things that we can start doing right now to have an impact on this? And so far, we've learned be more conscious consumers of our Halloween candy and chocolate and things that are in our consumer products. But what else? You know, how do we put some shovels to the earth, Jo-Elle?
Oh, in Chicago, there's a wonderful website called Chicagoland Environmental Network that has a variety of volunteer opportunities to get out there. Chicago is a really incredible place because it is the intersection of wetlands, woodlands, and prairies. So by its just natural location, it is a diverse ecosystem, or a series of ecosystems that really come together. And part of what we can always do, I think, in that direct action is remember that having a diverse economic portfolio is good. Having diversity in all aspects of your life is good. So there's always volunteer stewardship days. You can always go to your local cultural organization in Chicago. There are classes, there are workshops. You can visit them. And the great thing about Chicago is, again, that sort of value system. We're on a huge lake. And again, fresh water is incredibly valuable. And as Chicagoans, we need to protect our freshwater systems and our lakes. And there are a variety of nonprofits that actually their mission is around protecting the water for all, for everyone. And that link to environmental justice is there because when you look at, there's a neighborhood, at least that was in Chicago, Fuller Park, it's one of the smallest neighborhoods, has a high level of violence. It also had a high level of lead pipes delivering its water, right? So we have to look at that intersection and we have to begin valuing all people, right? Because Noe talked about that belt of biodiversity. Part of that resource is that the people there aren't valued, but the riches of their land are. And colonialism came in and assigned values, and people rose up and said, no, we don't want you here. And there were a lot of wars and conflict, and they left. But we have to assign value to all people and recognize that even though you may not go on a stewardship day, because you don't have the time, because you're working 2 jobs, because you have to, make a living, the fact that you might be doing something simple like shopping at a resale store, you're exercising, you're getting your needs, but you're doing it in a more sustainable way. You may not be able to afford the clothing that has recycled plastics in it, but there are things you can do, and you should be proud of those and amplify those efforts. And people shouldn't look down on you because of those things. But we've said, oh, no, if you have to go to a resale store, oh, you're poor and that's bad. That's not the case. We need to support and amplify what everyone can do.
Thank you, Jo-Elle. Noe, what's your reflection on some of the actions that people can start taking?
Yeah, there's, I think one of the biggest things that that we can have an impact, because something that we do every day is what we eat, right? And what we consume. First off, big picture, and this is something that we also got to recognize that we all have to realize that none of us are perfect, and we are all part of this. So, if you can be vegetarian, then that's awesome. If you can be vegan, even better. But many of us are not. I'm not a vegetarian. I should, but I'm not, because I genuinely like beef, for example, right? And so, for example, that is one of the main culprits for deforestation. And so as you're doing this, you have to be more mindful to try to get beef that's more local, that's hopefully grass-fed, that's beef that comes from a very short distance, and the same for many other meat products. And the biggest part is eat less. Make it a big deal. That is, when you're going to eat beef or you're going to eat meat, make it once a week or something like that, where it's a big, where it becomes a big deal. It's a special thing. It's not something that you consume every day, you know? So that's one thing to consider. The other thing to consider is be mindful of all the other products that you probably consume on a regular basis. I am an addict to coffee, right? But be mindful of where that coffee comes from. And when at all possible, get shade grown and potentially fair trade coffees, especially with all these tropical products, right? When you think about bananas, cacao, all these tropical fruit that you probably eat regularly, remember that they come from tropical regions. Make sure that when at all possible, consume responsibly, but also consume fair trade and shade-grown products, right? There's an awesome organization, which I think is called Fair Trade Chicago, or Chicago Fair Trade, that's what it is. Chicago Fair Trade, that's what it is. And they have all kinds of products that are extremely, they have all kinds of awareness campaigns. They have various types of markets and whatnot. So those are quick, straightforward things that you can add that actually will minimize things. The other thing is make sure that you throw away the least amount of food possible, right? You probably heard this from your mom and your grandma, you know, growing up, but this is pretty straightforward. Something, I think that they talked about it in the movie, something like 40% of all food gets wasted, right? There's so many, especially when you go to the supermarket and stuff, you know, the little tomatoes or the things that are a little bit odd looking and stuff, that people are like, I don't want to eat that. That's perfectly fine. There's so much of that that's perfectly fine. And there's other businesses now that are starting to consume, or rather repurpose those types of products that usually just go straight to the landfill, you know? So little things like that make a big, 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 big difference, I think.
Hey, thank you, Jo-Elle and Noe, for this extremely powerful discussion. And I just want to say thank you for all of the insight and knowledge and wisdom that you've shared about this issue. I'd like to put it over to if you can put up the take action slide, and let's get the chat flowing again, because I'm hearing a lot in the chat. Some of the actions that the group is aware of. I've seen websites being put up, some of the websites that the panelists have mentioned. So thank you all very much. But what are some of the things that either you do, your neighbors do, or that you recommend for others in the chat to do? And just to take note of some of the actions that are recommended by the One Earth Film Festival, you know, broadly in these categories of taking action in several different ways. And so one is connecting with nature. And the film reflects upon this a lot, this idea of connecting ourselves and reconnecting ourselves to ecosystems and all of the animals that make this world so amazing. Visit your local zoo, and maybe if you're down in St. Louis, go see Jo-Elle. And in Nature Center, because it really starts with not just a knowledge and understanding, but an appreciation of nature that can be lacking sometimes. Living lightly. Noel and Noe pointed out beef in reducing your consumption of that. And here we talk a little bit about reducing pollution in factories. So watch your consumption around pollution, the use of pesticides, and several other actions that you can take. Communicate and learn. This idea of staying engaged and staying involved. Noe pointed out that in the chat, several people are just, well, let's go to the mountains and disconnect ourselves from all of this. But we have to engage, stay involved. Every action matters, and I think there's an important component of being an American, right? We're part of that 20% that consumes 80%. Which means that your actions are outsized and matter even more. So being involved is even more of an importance, and not just simply doing the right thing, but also a responsibility. It's your responsibility to stay connected, to stay educated. I want to point out that in April, there will be more One Earth Film Festival coming up. Please join us for Earth Week, the Earth Week Mini Fest. That will be a part of the One Earth. So you joined us for the weeks of this over the last couple weeks, these screenings, but we'll be back for Earth Day. So to stay involved. And then use your voice, continue to support natural history collections, museum research, and put pressure on your local, national, and global figures in that. And there will be more information that will be shared out after this. So you will get more links and things like that. And there'll probably be some synthesis of all of the things coming up in the chat. So thank you very much for all of your participation. And once again, a thank you to Noé de la Sancha, from the Chicago State University and Film Museum, Jo-Elle Mogerman from the St. Louis Zoo and WildCare Park, and the wonderful people who make One Earth Film Festival possible, Anna Garcia, and there are some people in the tech who have been making this work, an enormous amount of volunteers who pull this off and make this happen, and continue to stay involved and engaged, and connected to each other and our amazing planet, and everyone that's here today, and making sure that we leave something behind for everyone tomorrow. I think Jo-Elle pointed out that we're looking at a change, right? Nature is going to continue. This planet is going to continue going on, but what is it going to look like at the other end of this? In making sure that we prepare for the best outcomes, and that we work for the best outcomes.